The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone is one of the most intriguing places on Earth. A region devastated by a nuclear disaster, seemingly frozen in time, but where danger never sleeps. The Stalker franchise brings this eerie post-apocalyptic world to life, blending open-world exploration with pseudo-survival horror. Stalkers, bandits, and survivors roam the zone, scavenging for valuable artifacts hidden within deadly anomalies. But artifacts aren't the only things the nuclear catastrophe gave birth to. The zone is crawling with mutants, twisted creatures, warped by the fallout, making them more aggressive and in some cases, even gaining psychic powers. With Stalker 2 on the horizon, I decided to dive into the original Stalker trilogy for the first time. Armed with curiosity, dread, and zero prior knowledge, I discovered that the world of Stalker is dark, dangerous, and unforgiving. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl was the first entry in the series, releasing on March 20th, 2007, and setting the perfect tone of what we should expect when venturing out into the zone. The atmosphere GSC Game World built really stands out among the competition. Despite being almost 20 years old, the zone may still be the peak of video game immersion. The world isn't centered around your character, it goes on with or without you. When you're out in the zone completing missions, you'll frequently stumble across stalkers hanging out by the campfire, sharing stories in their native language of their travels, or you'll find a group being attacked by mutants or bandits. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and everyone's just trying to survive to see another day. Whether it's the dynamic world, day-night cycle, the change from a sunny day into a torrential downpour or thunderstorm, the need to bandage a bullet wound to avoid bleeding out, having to eat to keep your body fueled, or guns wearing down and jamming if they aren't maintained. Every facet of Stalker is curated with the goal of immersing you in the world. Not to mention your in-game menu cleverly exists within a PDA, your Geiger counter beeps as you get close to radiation, and the weight of your inventory drastically affects how long you can run for. And above all else, I was captivated by just how deadly life in the zone truly is. The life you live as a Stalker is bleak and unforgiving, which is complemented perfectly by the game mechanics. There's no sugarcoating it, Stalker is hard. Whether it's your gun jamming on the first shot after a fresh reload, your bullets seemingly disappearing as you unload an entire magazine on an enemy, or mutant dogs attacking you from behind mid-firefight, there's certain death waiting around every single corner. If there's one thing I learned in my 30+ hours, it's to save, and save often. I definitely improved as I worked my way through the trilogy, but the beginning was pretty bad. It felt like I would die in a few shots, but it could sometimes take me an entire magazine to take out an enemy. This would usually result in me running out of ammo, not being able to replenish what I used by looting down enemies. But through trials and tribulation, I came to realize that this deadly world works both ways. Once I focused on essentially only going for headshots and shooting 2 to 3 round bursts while crouching and stationary, I started to become as deadly as everyone else. Managing my inventory was another huge hurdle I had to overcome. You can only hold a set weight depending on your suit setup, and once you go over, you lose stamina much faster up until a point where you can no longer move at all. But I always felt like the number was never high enough. I felt like if I wanted a few different weapons as options, I didn't end up with much extra space. Plenty of times I ended up leaving behind valuable artifacts just so I had enough heals and ammo to get me home alive. Balancing my inventory was definitely not my strong suit, but that only added to the immersion. I always felt like a lone wolf, just barely scraping by every single encounter. Every time I set out into the zone, I genuinely felt intimidated by the dangers that lie ahead, and it was a beautiful experience. When researching the trilogy, I came across this Reddit comment. Stalker gives you the tools to survive in a world that demands you use them, and I couldn't find a more perfect way to describe the experience I had. Stalker: Shadows of Chernobyl opens with a cutscene of lightning striking a vehicle and causing it to crash. We are the sole survivor, and regain consciousness after being taken to a nearby bunker. Our protagonist has amnesia and doesn't know who he is. All we know is that we have a tattoo on our forearm that says Stalker, and our PDA has the task of kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R. We do a few missions for Sidorovich as payment for saving our life, and along the way we discover clues of S.T.A.L.K.E.'s location. We spend most of the game following S.T.A.L.K.E.'s footsteps. In order to make it deeper into the zone, we need to disable the miracle machine, which is emitting frequencies that can cause people to lose their minds, turning them into zombies. We work with a group of scientists to get a Psy protection prototype to save us from the emitter, and while disabling it, we find info about a guide that can lead us to the doctor. We find the hideout but get caught in a trap, and the doctor frees us. In this cutscene, the doctor refers to us as S.T.A.L.K.E.R, the men we are supposedly hunting, and then tells us the monolith is all just an illusion created in a lab. He tells us there's a decoder that can open the door to the monolith's controls and leaves us to take care of it. From here, we need to make it to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant to reach the Wish-Granter, but a more powerful Psy emitter, known as the Brain Scorcher, is blocking our path. After getting lost in this labyrinth for a bit and taking out some bloodsuckers, I disabled the Brain Scorcher and fought my way to the sarcophagus. With the Scorcher finally turned off, everyone is trying to make it to the center of the zone through Pripyat, so we had a lot of enemies to fight. I stopped to check out the hidden stash that the doctor mentioned to get to the decoder, and then make it to the Wish-Granter. I wished for the zone to disappear, and so the Wish-Granter made me blind so that technically, the zone disappeared for me. I actually thought this was the end of the game, and I was pretty underwhelmed. But I think this shows how little Stalker holds your hand. I did everything I needed to get to the true ending, but I just followed my objective marker to the Wish-Granter and got this. It wasn't until I looked up all 7 endings that I realized I could go deeper into the secret lab within. I fought my way to the C-Conciousness, who addresses us as S.T.A.L.K.E.R and explains the history of the zone. After the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, the Soviet Union used the Exclusion Zone for unhindered psionic research purposes. This resulted in the development of various weaponized psychic devices. 7 scientists had their brains linked to a single neural network, creating a hive mind known as the C-Conciousness. Upon the end of the Soviet Union, the C-Conciousness took control of the zone and continued the research. The hive mind attempted to create world peace through global mind control. However, this attempt failed and caused the anomalies and reality warping nature of the zone. To protect itself, the C-Conciousness set up the Miracle Machine, the Brain Scorcher, and Wish-Granter. The Wish-Granter brainwashes those who reach it, turning them into monolith cultists programmed to defend the CNPP against further incursions. The C-Conciousness offers S.T.A.L.K.E.R the opportunity to link his consciousness to it and become part of the hive mind. I accepted the first time before loading a save and rejecting to get the canon ending. We fight through tons of enemies, jumping through portals, and eventually find the C-Conciousness and gun down the scientists. We see S.T.A.L.K.E.R laying outside in the sunlight, wondering if he made the right choice, and the game ends. All in all, I struggled to follow the story on my first playthrough, but after reading some explanations and thinking about it, I really like how they justify the existence of all the horrific dangers you run into during your time in the zone. I feel like the story can be as intertwined into your experience as you want it to be. You can go really deep with it, or just ignore it entirely and still have just as immersive an experience with Shadows of Chernobyl. With all that said, the introduction to the series isn't perfect. AI doesn't always react very realistically, and there are a ton of bugs. I read that the Stalker games require mods to make them playable, but as someone who played the trilogy completely vanilla, I didn't find anything absolutely game-breaking in Shadows of Chernobyl. It set the perfect tone for the series and an extremely high bar for my expectations going forward. I couldn't be happier with the time I spent with the first entry. Unfortunately, it may prove to be too high a bar for the rest of the series to meet. Stalker Clear Sky was the next game in the series, releasing a year and a half after its predecessor on September 15, 2008, and was a prequel to Shadow of Chernobyl. Here, you play as S.T.A.L.K.E.R, a merc tasked with stopping a group of stalkers from reaching the center of the zone, which you find out to be S.T.A.L.K.E.R before the events of Shadow of Chernobyl. Clear Sky reuses a lot of assets, as you'll find yourself in a lot of familiar places, but does add some new regions as well as the ability to customize your weapons. They also added a little blur effect when reloading, which was a nice touch. It's really subtle, but it went a long way in adding to the immersion for me. There was a big jump in production value during dialogue as well, featuring in-game cutscenes that play while characters converse that felt like a big step up. You can also choose sides in the warring factions of the region, or just remain neutral. Making a faction stronger does benefit the player, as they can provide you with better equipment, As a total package, I found Clear Sky to be more Stalker, but in a much different way. The gameplay, gunplay, and exploration is still very familiar, but the mission structure just didn't connect with me as strongly. I played completely vanilla, and maybe some mods would have improved my experience, but I feel like I wasted hours just trying to get the AI to do what they were supposed to do to complete my mission. The amount of times I captured an area in the swamps and then sat there holding the point until reinforcement arrived just for them to never come was incredibly frustrating. I usually had to backtrack the way I came, sometimes all the way back to the beginning of the swamps, just to get friendly AI to spawn in and then lead them all the way back to the point I captured. In hindsight, I'm glad I was able to get them to spawn in just so I could progress, because when searching for answers on what to do, a lot of people were saying that the faction system likely broke and reinforcements would never arrive, meaning you'd have to start the game over and should probably use mods this time. Clear Sky took me the longest to complete out of the trilogy, but I feel like that's just because of the literal hours I wasted in this section of the game. While I warmed up to the experience over time, it did not start off on a good note. Clear Sky is also much more linear than Shadows of Chernobyl. None of the Stalker games are true open world games the way we see today, where there's just one enormous map. Rather, they're broken down into multiple open world sections to explore. But Clear Sky felt much more on rails. It makes sense considering the goal of the game is to stop S.T.A.L.K.E.R from reaching the center of the zone, so we're always following his footsteps and being funneled in his direction. There was much less backtracking, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I felt much less inclined to go off the beaten path and just explore the zone like I did in Shadows of Chernobyl. A lot of areas are reused from the last game as well, which could be part of why I didn't explore as much considering I had already been there, but the structure of the game was much less appealing to me. The opening cutscene of Clear Sky shows a group traversing the zone as a huge emission goes off. Our protagonist wakes up in the Clear Sky base, being the lone survivor of the emission. The leader of Clear Sky, Lebedev, asks us to help out some stalkers being attacked by mutants, and during the rescue mission, another emission occurs. We're once again the sole survivor, and the Clear Sky lead researcher believes S.T.A.L.K.E.R acquired some sort of unusual ability that allows us to survive anomalies and parts of the zone that would kill any ordinary man. Some serious main character energy. Lebedev speculates that the increasing regularity of large emissions are a response to stalkers making it past the brain scorcher. And so we're introduced to our main goal, find out who was at the center of the zone and stop them at any price. After painfully helping Clear Sky regain control of the swamps, we make it to the cordon, where the traitor Sidorovich identifies the stalkers that made it to the center of the zone as Fang, Ghost, Doc, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and gives us a lead on where to find Fang. We follow the breadcrumbs to Yantar, the site of the brain scorcher, and meet with a familiar scientist who tells us S.T.A.L.K.E.R has a prototype psionic shielding unit which will protect him from the brain scorcher. I wonder how he got one of those, eh? We almost catch S.T.A.L.K.E.R in the Red Forest, but he escapes into a tunnel and blows the entrance behind him. So, we're forced to capture a bridge alongside the Clear Sky to find an alternate route to Chernobyl. We eventually fight our way to Chernobyl shortly behind S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and we're given a prototype EM-1 rifle to disable S.T.A.L.K.E.'s psionic protection. After a long game of cat and mouse, weakening S.T.A.L.K.E.R and jumping through portals to chase him down, we finally disable his protection. Lebedev thought this would calm the zone down, but it had the opposite effect. Zone activity increases dramatically, and the plant releases an emission which incapacitates everyone in the immediate area. We don't get any info about if S.T.A.L.K.E.R survives, but a cutscene plays showing S.T.A.L.K.E.R twitching out with the Stalker tattoo on his forearm, presumably right before the events of Shadows of Chernobyl. All in all, I felt like Clear Sky was a significant step down as a sequel. There were some minor changes to improve the gameplay, but it's hard for me to look past the frustrations I had when trying to progress the story. That, mixed with the linearity of the game, and tons of reused assets within the playable areas in itself, and I can't help but to strongly prefer Shadows of Chernobyl. Maybe a second playthrough with some mods may help change my mind, but I still think without the bugs, I just connected much more with the experience of the original. With that being said, it's still great existing within the zone, enjoying the atmosphere, and timidly taking on the dangers that lie around every corner in the Stalker universe. And Clear Sky did give me the opportunity to experience all that again, just in a different light. But with Clear Sky having a much different feel than Shadow of Chernobyl, it's very fitting that the final game in the trilogy turned things on its head once again. Stalker Call of Pripyat originally launched on October 2, 2009 in the Commonwealth of Independent States before coming to North America on February 11, 2010. Call of Pripyat is by far the most polished of the three Stalker titles, and therefore tends to be the base game for Stalker's extensive modding scene. It takes place inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exclusion zone, and is a sequel to Shadow of Chernobyl. Here, you play as Major Alexander Dektiarev, a former experienced Stalker sent to investigate the crashing of 5 military helicopters that went in to investigate the happenings at the CNPP. From the very start, I really appreciated the strides GSC Game World made with the interface. It just looks cleaner, and the vital information was easier to identify at a glance. Maybe some people disagree, but I feel like over the course of 3 games, they honed in on what works best. They also now show the important hotkeys in the bottom left, which is funny because this is when I learned that they existed. I know this sounds dumb, but I played the first 2 games without using hotkeys for any sort of heals. What can I say? I'm a console gamer at heart. This would have been really helpful in my last 25 hours or so of gameplay, but you live and you learn. While I really appreciated the hotkey addition, I think it's one small aspect that when combined with others leads to my biggest criticism of Call of Pripyat. Call me crazy, but I feel like the final game in the trilogy is a lot easier. This is almost certainly because I finished the first 2 and I've developed the skills needed to succeed in the zone. But the entire package here feels a lot more hand-holdy than the first 2 entries. Being a military man, the starting equipment felt a lot stronger in the beginning of the game. You have a decent amount of money, and above all else, seems like you have friendly stalkers littered around the map. What captivated me so strongly in Shadow of Chernobyl was the feeling that I was alone out in this hellhole they call the zone. If there weren't bandits trying to kill you, there were radioactive beasts chasing you down looking for their next meal, or anomalies you needed to watch out for. There were friendly stalkers out and about, but the game felt much more isolated. Call of Pripyat feels like the stalkers are one big community banding together to survive, always there to help each other out in times of need. To combat this, I did feel like you ran into more dangerous enemies like bloodsuckers and snorks more frequently, but there's rarely, if ever, a group of bandits trying to gun you down as you explore the zone. Not to mention being able to walk up and just ask for ammo or heals for free, resulting in me almost never struggling for resources. I no longer felt like I needed to mentally psych myself up every time I needed to leave my safe space and venture out into the zone to complete missions. I always felt like I had the equipment to handle whatever I had coming up next, and that took a lot of tension out of my playthrough. Call of Pripyat has to be the most welcoming for new players, but as someone that already fought tooth and nail to get here, I was a little underwhelmed at how easily I felt like I breezed through it. Obviously, I could have turned up the difficulty, but after being the first 2 on the normal Stalker difficulty, I wanted to keep the experience consistent. But with all of that out of the way, Call of Pripyat actually really grew on me as I progressed through the game. I really loved just being out and about in the rain or during a thunderstorm. I think Call of Pripyat really nailed the atmosphere, and I once again felt fully immersed in this dark, desolate world. One thing I didn't like at first was how at multiple stages, you're forced to save up tons of money to progress. Specifically, you have to pay off some debt to recruit friends, and you need an extremely expensive SEVA suit. I'm generally against things like this in games because it feels like artificial padding. You've done all the objectives to move on to the next mission, but you're forced to farm money for the sake of it before you can progress. But it forced me to interact with something I mostly ignored this deep into the series: artifact hunting. It was tedious at first having to wait for an mission and then search the anomalies in hopes that an artifact was dropped. And I typically only found 2 or 3 if I was lucky in the 6 possible locations after each mission. But once I got the process down, I actually really enjoyed the hunt. I was back to feeling like a lone survivor, gearing up for a dangerous raid in hopes of making a quick buck. And once I became efficient at artifact hunting, getting money wasn't really an issue anymore. Sometimes I find myself too goal-oriented, target fixated on clearing objectives and forgetting to just enjoy existing in the artificial world developers create for us. And the money requirement forced me to do just that. It was soothing to successfully complete an artifact run and return to a hideout to sell them for loads of rubles. And while I disliked it at first, I appreciate being forced to engage in part of the game that I would have otherwise ignored. Chronologically, Stalker Call of Pripyat takes place shortly after the events of Shadow of Chernobyl. With Strelok disabling the Brain Scorcher, everyone rushed to the center of the zone hoping to find some artifacts and to see what exactly lies there. The military try capitalizing on the situation and launch Operation Fairway, a recon mission to scout the area ahead of a full-scale military assault on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. However, all 5 helicopters sent in to scout ahead crash, and our protagonist, Major Alexander Dektyarev, is sent in to investigate the crash sites. After visiting all 5 downed helicopters, we learn that they were disabled in the air due to electric shocks before crashing. We also learn that any military survivors are heading to an evacuation point in Pripyat. However, to get to the city, we will need to go through an underground passageway that will require us to wear an SCVA suit to survive the tunnel. We complete a few missions to earn goodwill so we can assemble a team of stalkers to help us on this difficult mission, and farm some artifacts to buy our SCVA suit. After taking out a ton of mutants and monolith soldiers, we make it to Pripyat and regroup with the remaining military survivors. In Pripyat, we go on a few missions to take out monolith forces, save a military squad that needed help, and gather documentation on an unidentified weapon we looted off the monolith. We even have the privilege of dealing with a pseudo-giant. Eventually, we meet up with Strelok, who explains how the zone works and why the helicopters crashed in the first place. And then we gear up and fight our way to the extraction site. You're given a choice to stay or leave the zone forever at the end, which is a cool touch as it allows you to stay behind to explore or finish any side quests you missed, and you can always leave at a later time. And if you decide to leave forever, the game ends and you get a very Fallout-esque slideshow that details the fate of multiple NPCs and the outcome of all your interactions in the zone. While Call of Pripyat is by far the most polished game in the trilogy, I feel like it had the weakest story. Shadow of Chernobyl set the tone for the series and gave us some pretty deep lore with how the zone came to be, how it works, and fleshed out the world of Stalker pretty well. Clear Sky added a lot more background to the series and was extremely complimentary of Shadow of Chernobyl. It was a prequel and set the stage for the events we already experienced, showing how they came to be. But Call of Pripyat was very much just like, go investigate the crashed helicopters. Oh, it was the zone that made them crash. Okay, let's go home. If I had to rank them all, I'd still have Call of Pripyat as my second favorite behind Shadow of Chernobyl, with Clear Sky coming in last despite still mostly enjoying the experience. But Call of Pripyat certainly didn't earn its second spot on the list due to its story. And that brings us to the current day. At the time of writing, we are 1 month away from the long-awaited Stalker 2, and I could not be more excited to see what heights GSC Game World can bring this franchise to with modern technology. I'm a little skeptical just based on the fact that Stalker 2 was originally supposed to release in 2012, before being cancelled, resurfacing in 2018, and then suffering from multiple delays. That doesn't tend to bode well for the quality of the game. But being developed in Ukraine, GSC Game World has had a lot of issues to deal with during development. If you haven't seen it, the dev studio put out a documentary detailing the making of Stalker 2, and I think it's a must-watch for any fan of the series. Regardless of your opinion on the situation, it's crazy seeing the struggles of making Stalker 2, and I can't help but cheer for their success. We'll just have to wait and see if they can recreate the magic of the original trilogy all these years later. I'm almost mad at myself for never playing Stalker up until now. I actually pirated it as a teenager back when it came out, but it didn't run on my dinky little Dell laptop, so I sorta just forgot about it. But I finally rightened that wrong, and can honestly say I found one of my favorite gaming franchises. And that wraps up my thoughts on the original Stalker trilogy. Now, if you want to see a similar video where I played through the entire Half-Life series for the first time, click the video on your screen now.